Hello there voltage watcher people, PoohBear here and welcome to my channel. And today I'm going to do a very quick technical overview of Convert. I'm also going to be doing a demonstration using this device because it's not all that seems on top. There's actually quite a creative side to it. The main purpose of the device was to bridge a gap in a way between my modules because I use a lot of, especially the 1 volt, I use a lot of that, so I might output that or also might need an input for that. And let's say the purpose of this device, which really is to aid and speed that particular process up. Very straightforward. It has an input. You select your input range. There's a method, which we'll go over the methods a little bit later. You select your output and you can send your signal out. We've also got an option down here so we can actually pause and freeze the signal, and there's also this invert so we can reverse the polarity what's coming out of this particular port. We have two methods. There's an analog and there's a digital, and to either analog or digital you can apply the fold option, and by the way it's digital or analog, you can't select both, but the fold will be applied to both of them. In the analog mode, I'm trying to take the signal and leave it as raw as I can so we can actually process out of range signals. And what I mean by out of range is if I had, say, a 2 volt signal coming in here with a 1 volt range, well, I'm out of range, it's no problem. It would manage it, and if it was to convert that particular signal into a plus minus 5 volt, it would come out at plus 15 volts. If we're on digital, and what I do with the digital is I think of it as my MIDI digital, so I convert everything to a range of 0 to 127, and then I convert it back again. So a 2 volt signal coming in would into a 1 volt range, because it's going into a digital range, it will clip the top and make it a maximum of 1 volt, so the voltage coming out will actually be plus 5 volts. And obviously if I had minus a voltage, let's say minus 1 volt, again it'd be clipped, so it'll actually go through a 0, and then the output will be minus 5 volts. So a 0 volt up here in this particular range will be minus 5 in a minus plus 5 volt range. As I said, I've got this fold option as well, and the purpose of the fold is it's going to fold the signal back in. So on an analog, if we used to do that same voltage again, so I had 2 volts coming in, so that 2 volts, I'm going to fold it back on itself, and it'll actually come out as 0. So 2 volts will be 0 as it goes through the signal. So if this option was on fold, that would be 0. So 0 down here will be minus 5 volts. And actually that would be true for digital as well. So when we're folding either, especially when you go into the extremes, it's going to be about the same result you're going to get coming in. So here's another example. Let's say I'm going from 5 volts. And in fact, let's go from 5 volts to 5 volts. Now, going from 5 volts analog to 5 volts, the same as going from note to analog to note, 1 volt, and so on and so forth. There's no point in it at all. The signal is going to be the same, so there's no point. Putting fold on it changes things altogether. So if I say had an 8 volt signal this time coming in, and I've got my fold option, it's going to come in, it's going to say, actually I'm over my 5 volts, I'm actually over 5 volts by 3 volts, so I'm going to fold that back in, and so the result which will come out here will actually be 2 volts. Let's say this time I've got a 12 volt signal. Well, the same rule will apply. It's going to say, well, I'm over my 5 volts by 7 volts. I'm going to fold the signal in, so it's going to take away 7 volts. Now I'm in minus 2 volts, and it's going to say, well, actually, I'm out of my range, so I've got to fold that minus 2 volts back in again, and so the result will be 2 volts. So yeah, so an 8 volt or a 2 volt or an 18 volt and a 22 volt going through the system will come out as 2 volts. So it's just going to keep folding it back in until it's within that particular range. So it's quite an interesting option when you start to get quite creative with it. Having something like note, digital note, I could have obviously a signal coming in, it'll come through this, and it'll actually quantize that note for me. So it'll actually bring it properly into pitch, which is quite handy. If I set this, say, to 5 volts, doesn't matter if I'm on analog or digital in this particular case, and set this one, say, to minus plus 5 volts, That's equivalent of me taking a unipolar signal and converting it into a bipolar signal, or vice versa. So in this particular case, I'm going to be taking a bipolar signal, like an LFO, and I'm going to convert it into a unipolar, so it's now only at the top. And as I said, on top of all of that, we can use the simple invert, so we can really start flipping them signals around. Especially with this one, it's quite handy. So I've actually created myself a unipolar signal, which is obviously in the positive, and obviously with this, I can just suddenly flip it and put it into the negative if I desire. So this is where we're going to have ourselves a little bit of fun. Very, very quickly, what I was talking about earlier. So here's my signal down here. I've got it going through minus +5. It's coming out minus +5. So if I very quickly put it on +5, you can now just see how we could actually change that signal and invert it. So just something very, very, very simple there. Where this stuff comes in more fun, as I say, so I'm going to now say this, which is a ±5 volt signal. I'm actually going to say push it into a 5 volt range, and the output, as you can see, is actually going from a +5 right down to a -15. And now I'm going to actually fold it back on itself. So this is the actual signal fold on itself. In fact, this is actually a little bit easier to look at, this view here. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to apply it just a small amount of voltage to it. And you can see what we can actually do to, and this was actually a sine wave to start with, by the way. And you can see what we're doing with the shapes just by applying it. And because we're folding it back on itself and back on itself, we can get some interesting stuff going with it. And so what does that actually sound like? Well, what I'll do is, let me just put it back to, this should be a quite raw sound. Let's see if we can bring my keyboard into view. Ooh, there we go, simple little keyboard. So it's quite a raw sound. Then time we fold it up, as I say, time we then offset it. And I'll tell you what else I'm going to actually do. I'm going to just quickly grab this little bit of LFO and I'm going to bung that in it now. So now we're actually giving it a bit of movement as well. So can we actually see that on this one here? So you can see what we're doing. We're actually moving it around a little bit as well. And then with that, we get a totally different kind of sound altogether. So as I said, it's not just straightforward conversion. You can actually have a good play around with what you're actually up to. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.